podcast is brought to you by Mastery Partners, where our mission is to equip business owners to maximize business value so they can transition their business on their terms. Our mission was born from the lessons we've learned from over 100 business transactions, which fuels our desire to share our experiences and wisdom so you can succeed. Now here's your host, CEO of Mastery Partners, Tom Bronson.
Hi, this is Tom Bronson, and welcome to Maximize Business Value, a podcast for business owners who are passionate about building long-term sustainable value in their businesses. So in this episode, I'd like to welcome our guest, Michael Puldy. He's the founder and CEO of Puldy Resiliency Partners, a consulting firm focused on business resiliency. So as luck would have it, Michael and I met just a few weeks ago at a Provisors meeting. You've heard me talk about Provisors on this podcast before, but we met at a Provisors meeting on the West Coast, and we quickly scheduled some time to chat last week, the same week as the once-in-a-century Arctic blast hit much of the central United States. Now, I can tell you that being here in Texas, we've never seen weather like we had last week, and it got me thinking about disaster preparedness. And so I thought it was a perfect time for our paths to cross. Now, as I frequently talk about with our clients, and I mentioned here on this podcast, disaster preparedness is often overlooked by business owners until the disaster arrives. Now, I can say the same thing about the utilities here in Texas, which left millions of people and businesses without power and water and internet for days. They should have been prepared, better prepared for this. So while this is fresh in my mind, at least, I wanted to get into a serious conversation about disaster recovery and business resiliency. So welcome to Maximize Business Value, Michael.
Hey, Tom, thanks for having me here today.
I am so excited to get into this conversation. You know so much about this. Tell us about Puldy Resiliency Partners.
Well, I started Puldy Resiliency Partners last year in 2020 as an approach to help businesses learn about resiliency and really activate resiliency or business resiliency in their programs. I mean, if you look at the definition of resiliency, it's how can a company bend and morph but not break, and then return back to a normal active state after the disaster has passed. And so I started this business to develop and manage programs for companies to help reduce business risk. And they can do that by developing strategies, implementing business processes, and focusing on really what's important to them, which in a lot of cases is business processes that help their clients, their IT environment, and also improving employee safety.
So what's your background and why did you start this business?
Well, my background is like yours, computer science, and I started my career in a technical area, and I worked in aerospace for a while, and then I worked in banking, where I ran a data center for a large bank in the state of Florida. And if you think back to the ancient history of banking, it was state banking. You didn't have national banking like you had today. So I was there when banks were required to only operate in a state, and then there was regional banking. And during that time, again, more ancient history, banks would open around 9, 10 in the morning. And then by 5 o'clock, you were done. Now they had ATMs, though ATMs at the time, they actually ran on separate systems. So it gave an illusion that you were running a 24-hour business because you could go to your ATM and you can withdraw money at midnight. But the reality is it didn't synchronize with the basic main database banking systems until the next day. And so what would happen is I ran data centers for this bank, and we had data centers throughout the state of Florida, and occasionally things would go wrong. So I would get phone calls at 2 a.m, and I would try to dial up from home on my 28.8 modem. And there was always that mystery of, okay, is it faster for me to drive into the office at 2 a.m, or can I fix this online? And it was like 50-50. And so that kind of got me down this really interesting world of really, quite frankly, high adrenaline, high stakes disasters, and what do you do to fix them and respond quickly? Because the computer systems had to be operational by 7 a.m. So that was really it. So that's what got me into it. And then I joined IBM in 1996, and I built their disaster recovery data center in Boulder, Colorado, and began working with clients. I work with clients all throughout the United States on various disasters. And you could think about the major big disasters, Katrina, 9/11. But, the reality is most disasters people don't even see, they don't even know about. And then, of course, as the IT business evolved, I was into cybersecurity. And so I spent a lot of my career in the cybersecurity world. Well, this started for me in the late 90s, 98, 99, which back then was antivirus. So again, people really did not have that true view of what 24/7 was all about. And so you would be in there, a company would get a virus, or for example, a great story was IBM was giving all these laptops to the members of the PGA Tour. So all the senior golfers on the professional tour were getting IBM ThinkPads during Pebble Beach. Well, all these ThinkPads had viruses on them. So you can't be giving out 100 ThinkPads with viruses. So we had to send a small team of people out and eradicate all these viruses in time for the official presentation ceremony. So again, over the course of my career, I've just been working with so many of these types of situations for clients all over the world in crazy, crazy situations that this has become a career that I truly love and I'm very passionate about. And so I decided last year when I left IBM that, I should just keep the train going.
There's no end to dangers, right?
That's exactly right.
There's always dangers out there, whether they're natural or human caused. How in the world did you find the viruses on those laptops before you gave them out? That's just interesting to me.
Well, finding the viruses are usually the easy part, because usually the in those days the screen would go blue.
Oh yeah, okay.
So something like
the
that
blue
would
screen
happen.
of death. Yes,
that's exactly right. But it's very interesting when you think back to 1999 and in the early 2000s. A lot of the situational problems that we're seeing today, such as distributed denial of service attacks, malware, interesting ways that people can go in and corrupt your systems, weak passwords, all that existed back then. But what's happened now is people have almost militarized it. In some cases, they have militarized it. And so it's become a multi-billion-dollar industry around the world. And I read this very interesting report that I actually quoted in a white paper that I published on ransomware recently, where someone came up with this statistic that said malware and cyber threats is more profitable than the global drug trade.
Wow.
Crazy, right?
Yes. Holy cow. Well, clearly there must be money to be made in it, because, there are millions of scams out there just every day, right? And things that don't make it. Now, what year was that, the PGA ThinkPads? Do you recall what year that was?
Yeah, I think that was like 1999.
Okay, because I'm just looking here. I've got a shroud above my a shrine, if you will, above my desk when I played Pebble for the first time, and it was in February of 2000. And so because I built this ridiculous shrine to playing golf there, so
it's a beautiful place. I love it. I love going.
I was there right after, and they just actually played there recently. So I love that. That is interesting, and I'm surprised. When you're talking about the data overnight, of course, data now with ATMs syncs directly with the bank's databases. But back in that day, I guess if a criminal had been in the know, they could probably go from ATM to ATM extracting money until it's synced up in the morning and you realize that they're way overdrawn, right?
Exactly. There was interesting scams like that if you knew what was going on with the interworkings of the bank, that you could go in and find ways to extort money. So I'll give you another example. During the day, For example, if there was a computer outage at a bank, you'd walk into the teller and the teller would say, "I'm sorry, our computers are down. You can't deposit or withdraw money. But if you go outside to the ATM, you can conduct your banking." And
Uh-huh.
so the ATM systems would literally stand in, and they would keep a log of all the transactions. And then once the online systems, the core banking teller systems came online, then they would sync up.
Okay.
But there would be periods of time at night, for example, where they would disconnect, and because the batch systems were running, and then they'd sync up again, so that you had this crazy sync unsync game that went on every day, all weekend. And it was a big trick keeping everything in balance.
That's just fascinating. Well, so we could talk about that forever, but you've chosen the name for your business, Puldy Resiliency Partners, right? And I love that because I always think about disaster recovery as opposed to resiliency, and you're talking about something much more broad than disaster recovery. So business resiliency can, I guess, mean a lot of things: IT, disaster recovery, cybersecurity, crisis management, all of those things. So walk us through business resiliency and why it's important.
So business resiliency, you need to look at it from the standpoint, it's a strategy. It's a strategic vision on how you approach your company, meaning how you're going to approach your company always being available for your clients and your partners and your employees. People seem to forget the employees as part of the equation. So the idea is, a business will think through, what's the strategy for my company. I want to have everything online 24/7. I'm going to implement policies that say, for example, passwords are going to be 12 characters long or 15 characters long, and I'm going to back up all my data every day. And my employees will attend security training once a quarter. And so they'll have an understanding of, really, at the executive level, at the top line of the company, that says this is important to us. And then with the policies, it provides high level specific actions that the employees and the business owners are implied to take. So once you set that up and you create a governance structure, so for example, you have a top line executive at the company. It may be the CIO, it may be the CEO, that says, we're going to do this, and I'm going to have an understanding of what happens at my company. If you have a board of directors, usually there's a risk committee. So the risk committee would be the ultimate top end of this governance level. But once you have that in place, then you look at doing something called a business impact analysis. And what that means is, what's really important. You find your crown jewels. You find your core processes. So people may look at, for example, a core competency. We manufacture air conditioning compressors. That's our core competency to our business. Okay, well, what are all the elements associated with manufacturing those air conditioning compressors? I've got a parts distribution system. I've got a supply chain I have to manage. I have a conveyor system. I have employees that have to do these steps. I have a order intake system. I have a web process, web ordering system. So you have all these little intricacy components there that are important to the business. Once you have that identified, then you come up with something called business continuity plans, which is, okay, if something happens at time of disaster, what do I do? Now, you can't think of every single disaster on the planet. I mean, you and I could probably spend an hour and we can come up with 250 different types of disasters. So the best approach is look at it at a very high level. What happens if my employees can't work? What happens if my work location is not available? What happens if my IT is not available, which includes cybersecurity issues? And then what happens if there's a regional outage? And meaning that if there's a regional outage, typically there's like 2 or 3 of those first 3 items aren't working at the same time. So if you think about the pandemic, the buildings were fine. But then we decided, well, you know what? The employees can't go to the buildings. So now the employees are okay, but the buildings are now unavailable. So how do we run our business with the buildings not being unavailable? And everyone went through this major pivot over the first, I'll say 4 to 8 weeks during February, March, April timeframe to figure out how they can work remotely and work in the office at the same time. And that pivot back and forth for companies that were prepared, they did it very, very quickly. For companies that weren't used to, they didn't have a work at home strategy. They didn't have laptops allocated to their employees. They didn't have decent communications infrastructure. They didn't have cell phones. I mean, not everyone has internet access. So you had employees that couldn't have access to the internet and they couldn't go to Starbucks.
Right.
So you build in those contingencies, then you test them, you test the plan. So again, let's look at the pandemic. We had clients that in different parts of the world, including the United States, would practice. They'd say, you know what, and we're talking like February. You know what, we may not be able to go to the office. Let's experiment with 50% of our employees working from home and 50% of our employees going to the office, and let's see what happens. And companies that did that found either it worked or they found flaws in their systems. Then you review the plans, write the report. You do all this on an annual basis, and then at the beginning of the following year, you start the cycle again. Now that what I just described, which is not something I just magically made up. This is a process. It's an ISO process called ISO 22301, which is the worldwide business continuity standard. And that's the program that companies all around the world who are very serious about this, that's how they go about implementing business continuity and business resiliency.
So ISO 22301. Wow.
Correct.
Worldwide business continuity standards. Okay. I had no idea that even existed. And of course, like you said, we can't imagine every possible scenario, but I also imagine that the more a business thinks about this and practices it or has some sort of a plan in place, at least they're that much further ahead than businesses that have no plan in place. So
exactly.
So should companies look at this as sort of self-insurance, or is resiliency something else?
Well, I always look at insurance as I'm going to get a check if something doesn't work. I run a business. At the end of the day, if something happens to my business, I don't want a check. I want my business. I want my business functional. And so in some degrees, yes, this is self-insurance, but really business resiliency, I believe, should be looked at as a business differentiator. Because as we've talked about, a lot of companies don't really do anything to review how to protect their business. You mentioned a few things such as IT disaster recovery, backup and recovery is part of that, cybersecurity programs. Both of those are elements of a business resiliency program. You absolutely need to be doing something. And if that's all you can afford, I'm going to do my cybersecurity gig and that's it. Awesome. That's great. But you also have to recognize you really need more to recover your business. So let's look at cybersecurity, which is a huge industry right now. Everybody that I speak with who's running a cybersecurity business, they've got clients lined up out the door. And it's becoming a very, very high value business right now. So it's great if they can protect that malware event, or they can protect that hacker, or they can protect that denial of service attack from impacting your business. But let's just say something gets through, and like a ransomware, and your data is all encrypted. Well, if the cybersecurity company and your IT experts can't decrypt your data, then you need to either pay the ransom or you need to rebuild your data. And if you decide that you're going to, either one of those routes is not a pretty experience. It could take days or weeks to recover your business. If you're going to pay the ransom, you have to be careful you're not running into federal sanction laws, that you may accidentally be paying a terrorist organization or a sanctioned government, which in case then you're looking forward to a phone call from the FBI or the Department of Justice asking why you paid a terrorist organization or maybe North Korea. So, you need these other elements of, attorneys. You need a forensics attorney to be able to help you through this. You need if you're a company with a lot of clients and you've got a huge brand, even just a respectable brand that everyone recognizes and knows about, you're going to need some crisis marketing public relations experience to navigate through this. So there's this whole team of people that if you don't line them up before it happens, it's going to be very, very costly to line them up after.
Yeah.
So I think, again, yes, companies should be doing something. And there is a little bit of the insurance element to it. But the reality is, if you're really serious about your business, if you're really serious about maximizing the value of your business, then it's worth to spend a little pennies now to reap dollars later, when you can go to your clients and your partners and say, look at all these things that I'm doing to protect my business. Now go talk to my competitors and see what they're doing.
Right. Look, yeah, there are so many different ways that this whole concept of continuity and resiliency plays. Let's bounce over to power for just a second. So power plays, such an incredible role in our lives. In the business environment, we just expect the power to be there, right? We just expect it to be there. What options are available for businesses to prepare for power outages? And specifically, since so many people are working from home right now, what options are available for kind of home office power problems?
Yeah,
I can tell you that we just lived through that, right? So what happens there?
So power is people. You're exactly right. People do not recognize how important power is until it's gone. And a lot of people, obviously in Texas, got a taste of that. But, if you've lived through any hurricane in the Southeast, which, I grew up in Florida, so I have had my share of hurricane stripes, you know that the power is key to everything. So a couple of thoughts on that. One, for companies that are fortunate enough to have UPS, uninterruptible power sources, diesel generators, that's great. And that's something that it's very expensive to maintain that. Not everyone can afford it, but it's important to be able to have validation that you've tested those regularly. They're formally reviewed. There's trained, licensed people to make sure that those are operational. So for example, if you are using a cloud provider, and all the big cloud providers, they all have this, but if you're using a smaller managed service provider, talk to them about their UPS systems and their diesel generator systems and how they can validate to you that at time of disaster, those things are going to work. Because the reality is, and if they're honest, they'll tell you that, look, we'll have the way UPS systems work is there's like a string of batteries, like really fancy car batteries. And you could test them today and they all work. And then tomorrow a cell in the middle goes bad. So it's not like the whole string fails, but you could have some problems. So you got to really talk to your provider. If you're in an office complex, usually they'll have UPS or battery power for life, health, and safety. So like the exit signs are always operational. Sometimes it's good to go ahead and purchase a little bit extra battery power or personal UPS systems for your office, just to make sure things can go maybe a couple hours. It wouldn't help in the case of a hurricane. But for home offices, I would really encourage people to go out and get a Goal Zero device. And there's other manufacturers out here. But
spell that Goal, GOAL?
Correct. GOAL and then zero, ZERO. I've been a big fan of Goal Zero for years, and I have several of these devices. And I also have a few small 50-watt solar panels. So if we have an earthquake here in Los Angeles or some major disaster that requires me to be out of power, I've got these devices that allow me to keep my laptops running and allow me to keep my cell phones charged and my tablets charged for probably 36 hours. Without having to go out into the sunlight and recharge. I mean, at some point they fail, but the idea is to have personal power sources, the small chargeable battery units that you can get very quickly. When we used to go to trade shows, they would give those away a lot.
Right.
Goal zero devices are great, and then practice those. Make sure that you could use those and you understand how long they last. And then, for the people that are really resourceful, and I know people did this during the Texas outages, they would go to their car and they would plug in.
That was me, baby.
they would plug in and recharge their stuff.
Yeah, my wife and I, we dug a little trench in the snow, backed the car out of the garage. Very important to do that, by the way. I know that we actually had some deaths here of people doing that in their cars in their garage. Carbon monoxide poisoning people.
Yeah, exactly.
But so we pulled out in the driveway and we literally sat in the car to charge our devices and have. And by the way, it was warmer in our car than it was in the house because we had no power for a couple of days. So yeah, by the way, you mentioned, I love this goal zero. In fact, what we'll probably do is put a link to that on our website, just so that folks can see what you're talking about there. But you get this false sense of security because I have a battery backup right here in my setup. So I've got a very high, high end. It was a couple of $100, right, for the battery device that's running my computer and stuff here in my office. And my first, when the power went out, even just a couple of days before this big power outage, my battery lasted about 3 minutes. Well, okay, folks, it's not a once and done. You got to test this stuff. You got to make sure that it's going to operate. So you get this false sense of security. I'm like, oh, I got a battery. Well, the battery failed instantly. So
exactly.
So and like an idiot, I didn't go out and replace it right away. But it wouldn't have mattered. We were 48 hours without power here. But
the thing too is it's not like you have to run that all the time. I mean, You think about your laptops. So a simple thing is a lot of people don't have their laptop plugged in all day. They'll go in and they'll plug it in overnight. And then the next morning they'll unplug it. They'll work around the house, they'll whatever, and then recharge that evening. Well, the reality is you should keep your laptop plugged in as frequently as possible. And so that way you're keeping it always charged. So when something happens, you've got the maximum amount of charge on your laptop ready to go versus, oh no, I'm starting the blackout at 10%.
Right. Yep. Yeah, that's it. I charge my phone overnight every night. And yeah, there was a time when they said batteries, they have a memory, right? But that's lithium ion batteries are not like that, right? I mean,
exactly.
You can charge them. It was one of those things, like even on my Fitbit, my daughter told me, said, Dad, what, because I would go, 5 or 6 days without charging my Fitbit until it got down. And then it warned me. And I was like, oh crap, I got to go plug it in. And she said, why don't you just charge it every day when you get in the shower? I said, but honey, memory battery, and I'm just going
old school.
Man. Yeah, I'm old school. I grew up back, and you were talking about the ancient history of banking, when we traded salt, right?
Exactly.
All right. So before the break here, one more question about kind of big disasters. We're familiar with hurricanes. Hurricane season starts every year, June 1st. By the way, I lived through the aftermath of Hurricane Hugo. That was, I think, 89 or 88, maybe 89 or 90 in Charlotte. No one ever expected this. The hurricane hit at Charleston, South Carolina, and traversed all the way 200 miles inland, still as a hurricane. It was not downgraded to a tropical storm until it was 75 miles past Charlotte. So we had a hurricane, a direct hit, right, of a hurricane 200 miles inland. It's unheard of. But I went without power for 13 days. 13 days, no power in my house. And essentially hurricane season puts the whole eastern seaboard on high alert, right? So what actions are available for businesses on when a large scale regional disaster plays havoc? You mentioned earthquakes out there. What happens when it wreaks havoc on the landscape of the infrastructure? What can a business do to be ready for that?
Well, the problem, of course, when you have something like that happens is the complexity of the situation grows exponentially because there's so much stress on the system. You've got flooded roads, you have power loss, you have people that, they're displaced, the roads get blocked. So again, the best thing to do for companies, because everyone's situation is a little different, is run a simulation. Spend an hour, spend a couple hours, and go into the concept that says, okay, let's play this out. Hurricane is a great example. Hurricanes, fortunately, we have the foresight of seeing that they're coming. Now, obviously, it's not 100% accurate, but usually within 72 hours, you have a pretty good idea if it's going to hit your way or get close enough, you need to take action. Some companies, especially companies that can afford it, they will actually find another location prearranged in another state where they can drive to or fly to and have their employees, the critical employees, working from those locations. So again, play it out. Who are your critical employees? What are your critical processes? If the environment is going to be such that I need to evacuate, where should we go? Do we have contracts set up? I mean, one of the things that companies can do, and you don't have to be a big company to do this, you find a location. So if you're in Houston or Dallas, maybe you want to go up to Louisiana or Oklahoma, find a couple of hotels, call the hotels and say, you know what, I'd like to be able to set a contract with you in place that I can activate in a certain advance notice and block a section of rooms. And they'll be happy to do that. They will be happy to set something up for you. Now, it may not be block the hotel. That could get kind of expensive, but things like that you can think of in advance are extremely helpful. If you have opportunity to migrate work to certain locations, that's also important. There's also an interesting element that the Department of Homeland Security has implemented. It's the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, that we've all been hearing a lot about with the SolarWinds hack.
Right.
In the election, of course. But CISA has put in something called the wireless priority system. And if you're a business, you can register in advance to be part of this wireless priority system. And I think there's some certain qualifications around it, so not every business can do it. But effectively, what this allows you to do, whether it's wireless or a landline, when you make a phone call and it's like all circuits are busy, well, this gives you the capability to punch in a special code and you get priority access for your mobile device or your landline device.
Oh, no kidding.
Yes. So there's things like that are available to you if you plan for them.
Yeah. Well, and that's it. The advanced planning. I love the run a simulation. That's even companies that have great disaster recovery plans don't do a simulation to find out kind of where the failures are. So we need to take a break. We are talking with Michael Puldy, and we're talking about business resiliency. Let's take a quick break. We'll be back in 30 seconds.
Like it or not, eventually you'll have to come to a point when it's time for your business to transition. Will you be ready? Will you be able to get the maximum value for your business? Brought to you by Mastery Partners, Mastery Class is a 12-month program designed specifically for business owners. We meet once a month as a group to work through our Transition Readiness Assessment. Expand your business toolbox through leadership presentations, and have live interaction with other business owners. This program determines vulnerabilities in your business that will affect business value and your ability to transition in the future. Whether that transition is in 2 or 15 years, what you do now has long-term effects on the future value of your business. We have the know-how you need to get the results you want in your business to maximize business value. To learn more and secure your spot in the program, visit mbvmasteryclass.com. That's mbvmasteryclass, mastery with a Y, mbvmasteryclass.com.
We're back with Michael Puldy, founder and CEO at Puldy Resiliency Partners, and we're talking about business resiliency. Before the break, we talked about some natural disasters that can really wreak havoc on business. Michael, it occurs to me that really before the pandemic, no CEO probably ever even knew what the words business continuity or resiliency meant. Now, in 2000, I think every CEO on the planet probably mentioned these words in some context on a regular basis. So once we navigate our way through the pandemic, will anybody care?
That's a really good question. And I think there's a couple of history lessons that we can check back to. First of all, I read the book, The Influenza of 1918. And that book, it's amazing because you read this book and it's like reading what's going on now, or what was going on in 2020 and what's going on in 2021. You have the maskers, you have the anti-maskers, you had the governments that were like, I'm not buying into this influenza thing, this pandemic thing. You have cities. There was one city in Colorado, and it was on the western slope somewhere, so it was a pretty small town. And they said if you got off the train, we'd immediately throw you in jail for 5 days.
This was the 1918.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Woodrow Wilson, who was the president at the time, he did not buy into the pandemic. He went to France to finally negotiate the final armistice. He came back to the United States. He passed away 6 months later. No one really knows, but allegedly he contracted the virus and it impacted his health, which ended in his untimely demise. Now let's fast forward. In 2003, we had SARS, Secure Acute Respiratory Syndrome. Then in 2012, you had MERS, which was the Middle East Respiratory Syndrome. Then in 2015, you had Ebola. And after SARS, companies around the world implemented pandemic plans, and they bought supplies. They had, PPE everywhere. And around 2014, 2015, 2016, they're like, these supplies are really old. It's really expensive for us to maintain this. We don't really need this anymore. And by the way, these pandemic plans, we really haven't tested them. So we're gonna stop using those. We're just gonna throw those away under the guise of efficiency and corporate takeouts. And so unfortunately, over the next decade, I think the reality is, with the exception of people who are really hardcore resiliency planners, I think a lot of people are going to let this go by the wayside. Now, on the flip side, there's also a heavy concern because of the increased communication and the increased ability and flexibility for people to travel around the world. I mean, you think about it, you're 24 hours away from every person on the planet. Because of that, there's this small, minuscule piece of hope that people are going to continue to realize that pandemic planning is important. And I do think things such as temperature screening at airports and even in businesses, a lot of businesses, for you to go back to work, you have to get your temperature screened. Either there's someone personally holding a gauge, or there's a device that's tied into the security system. So if you don't check out, and they can do it very fast, within 2 seconds, and they create a nice log, and it's very OSHA friendly from a record tracking and auditability standpoint. I think those things are not going away. I think it's going to be like the airport security systems. So back when you and I were trading salt on the Silk Road, we could easily just walk on a plane, and our loved ones could kiss us goodbye. Well, those days obviously are long gone. And I think that we're going to see the same thing in lots of public places where they're going to be temperature screening and some sort of minimal level of protection that are going to be here with us forever.
And probably smartly, right? I mean, certainly when you come out of this, there are certain things that just make sense. Right?
Exactly.
And other things that may not, it just depends on which side of the fence that the folks are on. But we should always be mindful of things like, for example, people are now acutely aware that they need to wash their hands, but they should have been, right? I mean,
precisely.
We learned that when we were 5 years old, right? But we didn't do that properly and enough. We're now acutely aware. Stop sending your children to school when they're sick. right?
Duh.
I mean, it's silly things like that we should have already known, right? But hopefully now that there are measures in place. But you're right, we have very short memories, right? I mean, these things will be a thing of the distant past in 4 or 5, 10 years, whatever it is. So that and that's a shame. But we will have lasting effects, some really dramatic improvements that will stick with us. And now that I think about it, I hope that they do measure the temperature on people's foreheads before they walk into an airport, right?
Exactly.
That's a so simple thing. I've actually seen that installed in some of the office buildings where I have clients, that they've put in an automatic device, but there's no security. You can just walk by the device, right?
Yeah, it kind of defeats the purpose.
I know. Yeah. What is the point of that? So let me ask you: should business owners attempt to solve the resiliency equation? I'll call it now the resiliency equation on their own, or should they engage with a business like yours to help them?
Well, obviously, from my own capitalistic point of view, yes, it would be great if they would engage a business like myself. But the reality is, at a minimum, if all they can do is look, we're a small business. We really don't have a lot of capital to go ahead and invest something like this. Our profits are razor thin. Then by all means, they need to do something. I mean, you can go along and you can go online and download documents and templates and there's little things that you can do just to improve that valuation. So you're not doing nothing. I mean, something is better than nothing in this situation. But the reality is if you have a business that is expected to grow and expected to really evolve, then you need to be doing it the right way. And I mentioned ISO 22301 is the blueprint or the ISO standard. But the reality is not everyone needs to have ISO 22301. I mean, if a client requires you to do it from a contractual point of view, yes, by all means, you want to do that so you can win their business. But the reality is just following the steps associated with building a process, a regular process where you understand what are your crown jewels. You understand, for example, okay, if I'm down for 12 hours, how much money am I going to be losing? What's the impact to my employees? What's my profit impact, my brand reputation? You should understand that. And then how does that evolve that if you're down for a week, if you're down for 5 days, is your business done? That's really important to understand that, because more and more business partners and larger clients specifically, they're very sensitive to that because they want a partner who's going to be there with them for the long haul. And if I'm going to invest all my time, money, and effort doing business with you, then I want to make sure you're there. I don't want to call you when the power is out in the state of Texas and you tell me, you know what, this week isn't working for me.
Right.
Sorry.
Yeah. I will tell you that people were very forgiving last week, with what we lived through, but being more prepared, and certainly businesses that are critical, right? They need to have a strategy in place. So what I'm hearing from you, Michael, is that there are things you can do on your own, but if you need more advanced solutions, then you're the guy to call.
Absolutely.
So as our listeners know, this podcast is all about maximizing business value. So, Michael, what are the top 3 actions business owners can take to protect their business that also creates some value for their company?
So I think the 3 things, and I'll make it really simple, and I've said this on and off throughout the broadcast, but just to summarize it, know what's important to your company. Know what your crown jewels are, because that gives you the ability to focus on what's really important to me. Because people look at, oh, if I got to build all this resiliency stuff and planning stuff, I don't have time for that. It's like, and I can't afford it. It's like, great, I agree. Don't do that. Just figure out what the real key items are. What would really take you offline for 5 days and really create your business. So that's 1. 2, create a plan and document it. You don't have to create a 50-page behemoth tome of the ages. create something relatively small, something that, hey, here are the steps. Here are the phone numbers of the people to call. Here's what we want our employees to do. Here's what we want our clients to do. Here's our communication plan. You don't want to be doing that, when the lights are out. And then the third item is test the plan. Really test it and really understand really where your shortcomings are. And again, doesn't have to be long, doesn't have to be a quarterly thing, although quarterly is great, but ideally once a year. If you could test once a year, document it, it's great. And then let me just add one more thing, because I think this really adds to the value, is promotion of your program. Go to your clients, go to your partners and say, by the way, I want to let you know this is what we do to protect our business, because we value you as a partner and we value you as a client. And we're going to be there for you. And by the way, it's more than lip service. And here's why. And then ask them, now, what are you doing?
I love that. I love that, because is there any stats on what percentage of businesses actually do this in advance? It's got to be very small.
It's very small, but we are finding more and more companies, for example, they'll have a spreadsheet and they'll have 50 questions on the spreadsheet, and they'll say, please, before we sign that $250,000 contract or that $5 million contract, please answer these 50 questions. And there'll be things like, do you have a disaster recovery plan? Do you have a business continuity plan? Do you have a cybersecurity policy? If you want cyber insurance and you want the best rate on your cyber insurance, the underwriters will give you a questionnaire that asks these exact questions.
Yep. Like, so even doing these things, I think, to your point here on the promotion, that puts you in a very elite group of small percentage of businesses that actually do this stuff, and it really can be a key differentiator from your competition, because
Exactly.
so few people actually do that. I love that. All right, so we've gotten all the way to the end, and I've asked you kind of all of my questions. However, for our listeners, they know that I always ask my bonus question, and they listen all the way to this point, because this is like the most important question on there. And if you've listened to the podcast, and you're ready. What personality trait, Michael, has gotten you into the most trouble over the years?
I love that question. I tend to react very quickly, and often too quickly. And people will say, wow, that's actually really great. That actually sounds so positive. Well, it can be a positive. And in a crisis situation, it actually is very, very helpful. I think Elon Musk is very well quoted to say, look, just make a decision. Even if it's a bad decision, just make a decision, because you're moving the ball forward. But sometimes in the aftermath of making a quick decision, you realize that, if I just slept on that, not every decision needs to be made within a millisecond. And I have really taken that to heart over my career. And and probably as I've become more mature in my thinking, where instead of responding right away, I will now let me just answer that tomorrow. Let me sleep on that. And that has really saved me a lot. But unfortunately, I'm still not 100% good at that, but I try.
I love that. That is awesome. I also have that trait, but it was actually, I had the opposite trait years ago. And I remember when I sold a company to a big publicly traded company, and then I was just having we were on a retreat in Isla Mirada in the Keys in Florida.
Sure.
And I'm sitting with the CEO, and we're having some sort of fruity, tropical drink. And he says, Bronson, I've noticed you make really, really good decisions. And I said, well, thank you, Pat. And he said, do you really think through all your decisions before you make them? I said, I really do. I take my time. He goes, yeah, I know. He says, they're really good decisions, but you know what that tells me? And I said, what's that? And he says, you're not making decisions fast enough. I said, what do you mean? And he said, Bronson, if you're not making 3 bad decisions out of every 10, that tells me that you're not moving fast enough. We need you to move faster. I went, oh, all righty. So, that's been my litmus test is, 3 bad out of every 10, then I'm moving at the right pace. So the opposite can also be true. So, Michael, where can our listeners get in touch with you?
Well, they can always find me on LinkedIn, or they can email me directly at michael@puldypartners.com.
Awesome. Thank you, Michael. You have been just an outstanding guest. What a great conversation today.
Well, thanks, Tom. This has been a lot of fun, and thanks a lot for inviting me to appear on your show.
I'm so happy that I did. I think maybe we need to think about having a webinar where we can give some visual support to it as well sometime. You can find Michael Puldy, Puldy, at his website, which is puldypartners.com, puldypartners.com. We'll have a link to it on our website. And you can also find him on LinkedIn. But as always, you can reach out to me and I will make a warm introduction to my good friend, Michael Puldy. This is the Maximize Business Value podcast, where we give practical advice to business owners on how to build long-term sustainable value in your business. Be sure to tune in each week and follow us wherever you found this podcast. And be sure to comment. We love your comments, and I promise we will respond to every single one of them. So until next time, I'm Tom Bronson, reminding you to ensure that you have a solid business resiliency plan in place while you maximize business value.
Thank you for tuning into the Maximize Business Value podcast with Tom Bronson. This podcast is brought to you by Mastery Partners, where our mission is to equip business owners to maximize business value so they can transition on their terms. Learn more on how to build long-term sustainable business value and get free value-building tools by visiting our website, www.masterypartners.com. That's master with a Y, masterypartners.com. Check it out.
That was perfect. I wouldn't make any changes on that.